Suddenly, Jimi Hendrix is back in the spotlight, and everyone is chatting non-stop. After more than 50 years, Washington finally, the state acknowledged what music lovers know for the first time all along. Since before CO, something enormous is taking place on American music stages. Stars are vying to participate, and even the retirement of one icon is coming to an end. Simply to sign up for the internet is going to crazy with what's going on at the moment in relation to Jimi Hendrix. Born in Seattle on November 27, 1942, his parents were Lucille and Al, argued frequently and had financial difficulties. When Jimmy was born, Lucille was just 17. Al served in the Alabama military. Was prohibited from returning home and was imprisoned for more than a month. When he inquired, Jimmy's early years were filled with pandemonium. Both parents drank a lot of alcohol, 4 of his siblings lived in an unstable household. Were seized by the government and put in. Jimmy briefly spent time in foster care. Sent to live with a relative in California in 1945. Following Al's return, he returned Jimmy from the military to. In 1951, Al and Lucille got divorced in Seattle. Al was granted custody of Jimmy's younger when Lucille passed away in 1958. Brother Leon. Jimmy was 15 at the time of his liver ailment. Prevented the boys from going to the burial. He gave them whiskey instead, saying, "This is how men deal with loss." Within at the time, Jimmy turned to music for solace. At school, he had always been drawn to it. He used to walk about with a broom and assume it was a social worker's guitar. Observed and inquired whether the school could purchase him one, but it didn't work out. At the age of 15, Jimmy discovered a broken one-stringed ukulele while assisting the woman who helped his dad clear out a house. Claimed he could keep it, Jimmy. He learned to play by listening to others. To songs by Elvis Presley. Following his mother, Al eventually got him a genuine guitar after he passed away. He listened to it as his escape. Learning early rock and blues on his own, he left Garfield High School early. At 17, all he cared about in 1959 was music. He performed with local bands such as the Velvet Ones and the Rocking Kings. He frequently struggled and lacked a stable employment. Sometimes he slept in an abandoned house for money. Automobiles, but he continued to play and observe. One of them is intimately related to other musicians. Butch Snipes used his guitar to play. Teeth. Jimmy made it by copying the move. In 1961, as part of his act, Jimmy was arrested at the age of 19 for riding in a. He was jailed for a week for stealing an automobile. Was offered the option to join or go to prison. He decided to enlist in the Army and became a component of the Airborne Division 101. The screaming attraction attracted Hendrix. Eagles due of their standing in this was the same unit that participated in the D-Day landings during World War II at Fort Ord. He began basic training in. By August 1961, he finished California training and went on to become a private. Subsequently sent to Kentucky's Fort Campbell. Hendrix had a difficult time in the service. Disliked the rules and the system. He corresponded with his father in which he discussed how much he didn't like military life, but one thing stood out. He continued to use his Red Dane Electro because he called the instrument Betty Jean. Played it at Fort whenever he could. Another soldier whom Campbell Hendrix encountered was named. They bonded with Billy Cox, who played bass. Through music immediately and became into as close friends. They created The King Casuals are a band that began doing performances around the base and occasionally in neighboring towns, even while Hendrix was constructing his future in uniform. 1962 marked the end of his military career following only 13 months. The formal explanation was an injury to his ankle during his 26th. The Army claimed that he couldn't parachute jump. Longer satisfy the physical requirements, but additional documents indicate that he missed because of issues with his performance. Bed checks throughout shifts were unsuccessful at shooting exercises and performed poorly in physical training, according to some reports. He displayed homosexual inclinations, which at the duration may result in discharge. Even though all of this, Hendrix was given a respectable release following Army. Hendrix's departure, Billy Cox and I relocated to Clarksville. They wanted to continue producing in Tennessee. They remained King Casuals in their music. He began performing in tiny clubs. This was when Hendrix started creating his distinctive approach. He was a right-handed player. Upside-down guitar because he was being left-handed. He also began to use trickery. Want to play with and behind his head. The pressure on his teeth to entertain was, "Down there you," remarked intense Hendrix once. "Must use your teeth to play, or else you get shot." It served as a means of expressing that the audience has higher expectations than skill alone. If you weren't standing, they demanded a show. You weren't asked back by any band. Leaders disliked his flamboyant mannerisms and believed he was attempting to take the prominence, but Hendrix persisted in promoting his further. He performed from 1962 to 1965. As the Chitlin's backup guitarist circuit, which was a collection of locations throughout the East Coast and South Midwest place black musicians could play. The circumstances during segregation were rough, the salary was sometimes low, or Bobby Rush, who didn't exist but played according to the circuit, they were occasionally paid. Jimi Hendrix in Food in January 1964 felt stuck after playing for years. Behind other artists who are pursuing their regulations and living in their presence, he now desired more command over his. He decided to combine his work with music. After leaving the backing duties, he relocated to the Teresa Hotel in Harlem, where he encountered Lithophane Priggen, who was referred to as her fate, participated in the Harlem music scene and started dating him more. She then provided him with a place to stay. Encouraged him and urged him to continue. Around that time, he also got to know Albert Allen and Arthur Allen were twins. Brothers that have strong ties to Harlem's clubs. Hendrix began playing in the city, performing in tiny venues whilst seated in with many bands and attempting to obtain. Observed that in February 1964, he went into the amateur competition at the Apollo. He took first place in theater, which earned him a boost, demonstrating his ability to keep a crowd. Independently, shortly after winning he benefited from contact with the Joe Tex Band. Obtain a Ronnie Ely Harris audition. Impressed him and received a job offer as the Ely Brothers guitar player backing band, which he immediately accepted. Was a significant advancement in March 1964. Hendrix's first studio recording track, which was a single with two parts called Testify to the song with the Ely Brothers, was made available in June, but it failed to chart. He played in May, though, and that was a start. Don Cobb's guitar on Mercy Mercy. That track was released in August and made it to on the Billboard list, number 35. Hendrix and the Elys went on tour for the majority of 1964, but by October, he had developed he's sick of seeing the same set every night. He departed the band because he wanted something different. He joined a little while later. The Upsetters, Richard's touring group, and they went to Los Angeles in February 1965. While in Angeles, Hendrix took a unmarried and Little Richard phoned me. I'm not sure what you have, but it has me. Don Cove composed the song, and released only through VJ Records. Reached the 92nd position on the rankings and spent a week there, tiny by then, Richard's fame was waning. During the Willix Hotel stay in, Hendrix met a musician in Hollywood named Rosa Lee Brooks, asked him to perform. The aside for her singles Guitar Was My UT was a song on the B-side and Diary. Arthur Lee wrote them, and they were performed by guitar on both songs, and even had a meeting with Lee. They made buddies during the session. And Hendrix subsequently turned into a strong advocate for Hendrix with Lee's band Love. In July 1965 first appeared on television, when it was on a local show called Night Train. In the Nashville he appeared on WLAC-TV as a member of Little Richard's band's backup singers Buddy and Stacy on Shoot Gun, which this is now the oldest video of when the Hendrix performed live. Things weren't easy with Little Richard. The two of them frequently claimed that Hendrix enjoyed flaunting himself on stage. He possessed a sense of style and dressed flamboyantly. That ran counter to Richard's reputation. In Robert, Richard's brother, was sacked in late July. The band's Hendrix on July 27, 1965, the first recording contract that Hendrix signed at Sue Records, it was with Juggy Murray and Copa, a management business. He then short returned to the Ely Brothers and put out a second single, Please Come Over and Let Me to Dance With You. Have you ever been let down by the B-side? Curtis Knight and Hendrix met later that year. Knight led an R&B group at a hotel called Hendrix. The Squire joined them and remained in October 1965 for 8 months. Knight also captured the song, How Would You Feel? Hendrix, but Welcome Home on the B-side had already agreed to a 2-year contract with on October 15, 1965, Sue Record also inked a new contract, this one being a 3-year agreement with Ed Chalpin's cooperation ended, although the contract, it created issues for later in his career. Hendrix was performing with the Squires. Hendrix and Curtis Knight toured and collaborated with other musicians. With the Starlighta and Joey D, he also performed on a recording with King Curtis. On the Ray Sharp single, Help Me, that song was divided into 2 halves. Received his first credit as a songwriter and he composed 2 instrumentals in 1966. Knock Yourself Out and Hornet's Nest, they were both made available as a single by 1966. Curtis Knight and the Squires. Hendrix was prepared to depart from he relocated to Greenwich Village for the R&B culture. The region of New York had a robust, it was brimming with creative energy. Musicians, artists, and fresh concepts. Hendrix was hired to perform at Café Who. He began a new business on MacDougal Street. Jimmy James and the Blue is a band. Randy was one of the members of Flames, California, who went on to establish the group The Blue Flames. Spirit was played everywhere. Those gigs helped to mold New York HRS. He began experimenting with his sound. September will see new trends and staging techniques. The band performed some of their final songs in 1966. Performs together at Manhattan's Café Au Go. They served as the backup at the time. Group for John Hammond, a singer, on Jimi Hendrix. On September 24, 1966 arrived at the airport in London with nearly he had a change of clothes, but nothing else. 40 borrowed hair curlers, a guitar, and the airport had cash in his pocket. I was unaware that it had been renamed Ethro Harris. Yet, but this journey would alter he had been living earlier that summer. Performing in New York City at modest venues one evening, using the alias Jimmy James at Greenwich Village's Café Why used to Chaz Chandler, an animal lover, noticed him. The performer, Chandler, was seeking fresh skill. After seeing Hendrix play, he realized he had discovered something unique. Just 12 days following Jimmy's arrival in London, the experience of Jimi Hendrix arrived together. They took place on October 6, 1966. Chandler brought in musicians right away. Encountered Noel Reading during the Jimmy of New Animals, enjoyed how Reading recognized the development of the blues, and he also admired his unconventional hairdo for the Chandler, the drummer, called Mitch Mitchell. Mitchell has recently lost his job at the Blue Flames. His and Georgie's fame. Jimmy bonded with them since they were in love. For the Chandler of rhythm and blues as well assisted in creating Jimmy's recommended image. Altering Jimmy's spelling to Jimmy, it changed the name's appearance. And made the band's style more distinctive. Began playing immediately after a week. They joined Johnny, a French vocalist. Holiday is touring with 4 shows in. On October 23, France recorded Hey Joe, their first single at Delane Lee. Within a month, London studios had since Jimmy's arrival in England, but their loudness made recording difficult. Marshall amplifiers led to issues with the studio equipment. Jimmy was also anxious. On his performance of the B-side of The Stone Free, a single, was recorded on it was the first original on November 2. Song that Jimmy and the band Chandler wrote had urged him to compose it so that Jimmy could make money by publishing despite their skill receiving after a difficult record deal. The Who are Chris and Kit Lambert's managers. They were signed to their new label by Stamp Track Records due to the fact that the track was still the first single was released. About December 16, 1966, through Polyer, Hello Joe debuted at number 41 in the UK charts. Later, it peaked at number 6 and remained there. Jimmy has also been in the chart for 10 weeks. Appeared on television programs such as Ready Steady, Top of the Pops and Go, which aided the only a few songs receive more attention. He had served as a backup some months prior. Presently plays as a guitarist at small clubs in New York. Chas Chandler, who was rising to fame, had a plan. He wished to ensure the correct. In October, Hendrix performed for the public. Only a week after Jimi's arrival on January 1, 1966, he went to the London Polytechnic with Chandler. Jimi asked where Cream was playing if they decided that he could take the stage with them. He listened to Howlin' Wolf's Killing Floor. Surprising the audience, Eric Clapton was backstage following the startling song and unable to speak. He lit a cigarette. Chandler was told, "You didn't tell me he was good." By the middle of November, Jimi was performing at the Bag. The audience at O'Neill's Club was made up of celebrities like John Lennon and Paul McCartney, Pete Townsend, Jeff Beck, Mick Jagger, and they couldn't believe what Brian Jones they recalled seeing Kevin Eyes. The scene and declared that everyone was swore in disbelief at that moment. Jimi moved with his family to 34, Montague Square. Kathy Etchingham's girlfriend, the apartment was held by the Chandler Ringo Starr, and his Jimi's girlfriend also resided there. Played at prestigious clubs such as the Scotch close to Buckingham Palace in St. James. The Rolling Stones and the Beatles have their own tables there. What had the Chandler done? His goal was to make Hendrix the London's most talked about musician in 2 months is still not enough. Went without a hitch since Jimi was fervent and held strong views on the way his music ought to sound. During the initial studio Hey Joe Chandler sessions asked him to disable his amplifiers, which resulted in a Jimi had a violent outburst, shouting that he couldn't operate in such a setting. He stated that he might as well return to New York. Chandler maintained his composure. Having just originated at the visa office and had Jimi's travel back and his passport, he put the ticket in his pocket and put them on the mixing station and uttered, "Now go ahead," returning to the United States. In another version, all he said was, "Piss off." Billy glanced at him, chuckled, and uttered, "All yes, you called my bluff." That particular time established the standard for their job. Jimi and Chandler jointly desired freedom. Provided him room while making sure that remained on course for the actual turning point. Got to them Terry on June 18, 1967. It was a warm night at the Pop Festival. Hendrix had gained popularity in London, but in the US, the majority his name was still unknown to many. Was aware that this performance could alter everything. That the Who had just completed their instruments, shattering their set. Jimi needed to take on a more ambitious task. Prior to performing, he asked a stagehand. He concealed it behind his lighter fluid. Brian Jones, the Rolling Stones amplifier. Jimi was introduced to the crowd by Stones. Finished his set by dropping "Wild Thing," flipped his instrument to his knees. "I'm going," he said into the microphone, "to give up something I truly cherish, man." After that, he added the lighter liquid. Placed it on his Stratocaster. He flung it and shattered it 7 times with fire. The flaming fragments into the gathering. Ed Carve, the photographer, caught the scene. The picture became among the most well-known images from the history of rock. That night Hendrix became a household name in his own nation. Robert Christgau, a music writer, later stated that this act brought about a guitar playing so strong and innovative that no ever since Jimi's first one has matched it. You made ripples with your album as well. In the UK, Experienced was published on it. Remained on the British side on May 12, 1967. Charts for 33 weeks and attained the number 2, right behind Lonely by Sgt. Pepper. The UK version of Hearts Club Band didn't include Hey Joe or The Wind, Purple Haze, and instead, it had songs, such, Cries Mary, similarly to Red House, which exhibited Hendrix. Jimi's blues roots disliked the UK CD cover. Following his triumph at Monterey, a new version was issued by Reprise Records. Of the album on August 23 in the United States. The American release in 1967 had distinct songs and fresh cover art for psychedelic music. By this version of Carl Ferris contained the hit songs, however Red House was taken out. Is It Possible for You to See Me in Purple Haze? Reached just number 65 on the US singles chart, but the record itself turned into a huge hit on FM underground radio. Rose to the 5th position on the Billboard album chart, where it remained for 106 of those weeks. Week 76 were in the top. Additionally, it peaked at number 10 on the Billboard R&B chart, where it remained for $20,000 was spent on a 70-week reprise to spread the word about the CD, which was a great Jimmy's sum at the moment. In 1968, when Hendrix was most famous, he released Electric Lady on October 16. Land's album was a double, with the first, when he finished producing it all by himself, was his only album to achieve a number 1 ranking. Songs that are on the Billboard charts, such as Crosstown Voodoo Child, Slight Return, his rendition of Bob Dylan's All by Traffic, The Watchtower, demonstrated the extent of his version of Watchtower had been accompanied by music. Became his sole hit in the top 20 on the Dylan even mentioned Hendrix on the Billboard Hot 100. Discovered elements in the music that no one else had. Would have assumed that this record was additionally a symptom of the increasing tension. Jimmy had terminated his collaboration with Chas, the man who initially brought him Chandler. He desired greater control when he moved to England. Turned his attention to the sound so that he frequently played the bass himself rather than Noel Reading's obsession with perfection was. In 1968, he and his manager took over. Michael Jeffrey purchased the old Greenwich Village's Generation Club. They first intended to reopen it as a music center, but they later discovered Jimmy was investing around $300,000 annually in studio time, therefore they made the decision to construct they dubbed it their own studio. The creator of Electric Lady Studio was designer John Stoic. To complement Jimmy's manner, there were no sharp edges in the rooms. Soft lighting was present in the round windows, and vibrant murals. Everything was supposed to feel serene and imaginative, but the project encountered difficulties. Jimmy was